So, what is a brand? A couple years ago, my high school roommate from Choate, Sophia, she and I were talking, and I was talking about what I wanted to do, and she just said, Mary, you know, to understand what you want, you have to define what your brand is, who you are. And I said, I didn't really understand what she meant, but I knew that I wanted to pursue cardiology. So in 2005, I saw this film called Something the Lord Made on HBO, and it starred this cardiothoracic surgery researcher who was studying a way to deliver blood flow to the lungs in these babies who had heart problems when they were younger. It was called blue baby syndrome at Johns Hopkins. He was incredibly talented, he did incredible work, but unfortunately, because he was African American in the 1940s and at Johns Hopkins, he didn't get the recognition that he deserved, that his mentors got, and he didn't get the recognition sort of around the world for the work that he was putting in. And over time, this affected him, but what he realized was it wasn't really about what other people thought of him or what his mentor felt about him, but it was about the work. He loved the work. And despite all this adversity, he was going to continue to do the work, and he was honored later at Johns Hopkins later on in his life and got an honorable doctorate. At the same time, I was in college and I was shadowing a cardiologist, and I just fell in love with the field. It was very versatile, reminded me of being at Choate. You know, you could do many different procedures. You didn't have to do one thing. You didn't have to pick one thing. I could be, you know, in the stress lab. I could be in the cath lab. You could watch people put in pacemakers. I said, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. And the cardiologist treated me like an apprentice. He treated me like he respected me, and he made me feel that this is something that I can do. Even though we came from completely different walks of life, he encouraged me to continue on with this dream. So I was inspired, and I was mission-driven, and I was ready to take on this passion, this goal. Nothing was going to stop me. And I knew that, like Dr. Thomas, I was going to face a lot of adversity. I just didn't know what or how much. So here's my story. So in 2013, fast forward, I was getting ready to learn about the residency match. So this is sort of an algorithm that matches you with a residency program when you're in medical school. And you don't have much choice on it. You rank them, they rank you, and you just kind of see what happens. So this is the most exciting part as a medical student. You work so hard, you've taken all the tests, you've done all the right things, you've showed up, you've been on the wards, you know, you got treated badly by surgeons, you dealt with it, you still kept going, you still kept a positive attitude, you took all the tests and all the board exams, everything that you needed to do. And then this was the day that you were going to find out which program that you were going to go to finally take all that knowledge that you've studied and worked really hard for to help other people and be able to use it in a positive way. So I was excited. I had interviewed at Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Johns Hopkins. In fact, when I went to Hopkins, I found out where Dr. Vivian Thomas's portrait was, and it was just a wonderful experience to really connect and say, you know, I'm on the same path as him, and I was making it, right? And I was applying it to pediatrics, and I was super excited about it. So I got an email, and I just kind of just opened it, you know, because obviously I would just see, you know, where I'm going. And it said, sorry, you didn't match. So I was in shock. I didn't know what that meant or what they were saying, and I was starting to go through sort of the stages of grief and kind of trying to intellectualize it, trying to bargain and say, well, this can't be true. I called the program, like, what's going on? I interviewed at all these places. I did all the right things. You know, this is supposed to work out for me. I don't understand what's going on. They said, sorry, you didn't match. So I went to the financial aid office. I said, well, what does this mean? This means, well, here's how much you owe, $400,000 to the government. And I didn't have a job. And I was $400,000 in student loan debt. So there was really no answers. There was no way to try to get into residency. There's sort of a thing that you could try to get in towards the end, but none of that worked out, and I didn't even know how the system worked, and my medical school didn't know too much about it either. So I went to my advisor, my mentor, somebody who I could trust, somebody who I felt would give me the answers to help me out here. And he goes to me and he says, well, maybe you can teach nursing. And I said, you know, obviously nurses are incredible people, they're the backbone of the hospital, but I went to medical school. How am I going to teach nursing? I'm going to be a physician. This doesn't make any sense. So it sort of snapped me out of my sort of depressive state, and I was just in a rage. I was fuming. How could he say this? He knew what I went through. He knew I did the right things. So I said, I looked at it and I said, you know what, the risk of the debt that I'm accruing at this school has outweighed any of the benefits, and I'm going to take the reins of my own life, and I'm going to figure this out for myself. So I paused. I went home to my mother, who was a physician. She went through a lot of things in the 1970s as an African-American woman physician, and just sort of confided in her from just a mental health standpoint, what can I do from this point on? But she really had no answers, because this was just a very different process, and she just didn't know what to do. So I paused, and one of the first things I did was take accountability. So my strategy of going into residency wasn't the best. So I should have spread my net a little bit wider. Instead of just applying to Yale and Harvard, I should apply to all different programs to try to have a better probability of getting into a program. And next I did some soul searching and realized, maybe pediatrics wasn't for me. Maybe they picked up on that, and maybe internal medicine was a better fit. And then I gained some humility as well. Because nothing is guaranteed. Even if you do all the right things, sometimes that rug just gets pulled from underneath you and there's nothing you can really do about it. So I just gained a little bit of humility to say, I can't really expect all of these things to happen regardless of how hard I work. Then I got creative. I expanded my network. I talked to folks who had to get into internal medicine residency who had to be a little bit more creative, folks from other countries. And one guy said, well, you should probably try to go through research if you want to try to get back into the pool and try to apply it again to a residency program. So I was sending emails, crying, sending emails, just completely in distress, but I didn't stop. I kept going and going because I knew I had a purpose and I knew this was what was meant for me. And then finally, I was in Cleveland and I finally received an email back from Boston. And it was a physician who was doing research on a heart rhythm problem called atrial fibrillation and genetics. And he said, I just happen to be coming to Cleveland tomorrow. So why don't we meet and see what we can talk about? So he gave his talk at Case Western, and I went up to him. I said, listen, I didn't match. And that was almost like, you were almost like Hester Prynne with a big A on your chest. Nobody wanted to look at you. Everybody was ashamed. Nobody knew what to do with people who did not match, right? But I just said, you know what, I didn't match. But it's not because of merit. It was just a strategy error. I've re-strategized, and now look, now we have a new opportunity to work together. Now you have someone who's been through medical school to be a postdoc in your lab. So he said, okay. And a couple of days later, he said, you're hired. Let's go. So I was a postdoc in his lab. I did research on the genetics of atrial fibrillation. I fine-tuned my brand, made it more specific to me, learned more about statistical software, gained new skills. And I reapplied to residency. I did a better strategy this time. I got into residency. During this time, I met someone, and we got into a relationship. I got engaged. Throughout residency, I was working very hard, doing well, doing research, focusing a little bit more on my brand as well. We got married. I got pregnant. I was like, everything is going great in my life. I'm getting the American dream. I'm getting my goals, my brands. I'm going towards cardiology. This is awesome. Everything's going to be just smooth sailing from here. Everything's going to be great. We were getting ready to move into this big house. I was going to be able to pay off all my loans. We were doing really well sort of financially. So I said, all I have to do now is just start this cardiology fellowship, and then it's over, right? I just finish this last step, and then I can be a cardiologist, and that's it. So when I was starting the cardiology fellowship, the one thing I realized was I was looking at the walls and all the pictures. And I said, well, I'm going to be the first African-American female ever in the South in this particular program in the South as a fellow. So coming into that, you kind of get there's this unwritten rule. Well, that means I'm going to have to work twice as hard. That means that I'm not going to be able to express any of my humanity as a woman, any of my individuality, because I have to kind of assimilate and be like everybody else, work twice as hard, do twice as much, regardless of what was going on behind the scenes. And I was also getting a master's of science at the same time. And so when I started, I was postpartum, and they said to me, well, you can't have maternity leave. And I said, that doesn't make sense. And they said, well, you just can't. I don't know what to say. So I tried to get creative, and I said, all right, well, I'll continue with my master's of science. I'll take my board exams. But why don't you try this virtual learning thing? I heard about this thing at Harvard. Why don't you try this where I can do this from home and take care of my child and nurse her and still be, get my master's of science? I was like, ma'am, no offense, but I got my medical degree from Case. I can get your master's degree from home. So I, was again fueled up, and I said, this is something that I'm going to do, that I'm going to continue to pursue because I'm supposed to be here, and this is what I'm going to do. Sadly, during this time, my father had developed dementia, so he didn't know at this point who I was, or that I had a baby, or that I'd been married or anything, and he passed away. So I was planning his funeral, thinking about his life and my life, and told my research advisor, my cardiology research advisor, hey, I got to go home, I got to plan my father's funeral. And he says, well, just don't let this distract you from your research. So at the same time, I'm writing a grant, I'm taking care of my child, looking for some type of support, and really that's kind of what it was in this particular environment. So a lot of that stress was being brought home, back at home, and things were not going very well at home either. So the following year, my stepfather, who I was close with as well, also passed away. And so I was never able to grieve initially, and now I still had to kind of hold it together, to show up every day, to kind of wear the mask, right? And I was starting my clinical fellowship. We were on call over 30 hours often, driving home 30 minutes. My baby didn't really get to sleep. We never really got to bond, and everything just started to spiral. So I was showing signs of depression, family was getting concerned, losing weight, unexpectedly, not getting any sleep, and I was having extreme burnout, and I felt very undervalued, underappreciated, and it just felt very, very inhumane, both at work and at home, because I was not enough of a mother at home, not enough of a cardiologist at work, and I was trying to get the sense of, I think they're going to try to get rid of me, because I'm not, working twice as hard, being twice as good as the guys who didn't have any children, who were single, who were able to live by the hospital. But there was no excuses. I had to keep doing it. So it was a very, very difficult time. Then 2020 comes, and we hear about this virus that was coming. And it was coming out of Wuhan, China, and it was in Italy. And one of the physicians pulls up a video of patients on gurneys lined up against the wall. And they were in respiratory distress, but there wasn't enough oxygen, there wasn't enough ventilators for these people. And I thought, well, this is in another country, I don't know how they're going to take care of it, I hope that they can. I felt for the folks in Italy, but we were still continuing our jobs, our roles. Then we find out that this virus is now in Seattle, and it's now here in the United States. So when you hear this, you expect, well, it might be like when we thought Ebola was coming. We're going to have our hazmat suits, we're going to learn how to protect ourselves from this virus. Maybe the National Guard is going to come and protect us and help us and train us, basically for war, because that's what we were going to face. But none of that happened. We were hit, it was like a tsunami was coming, like a meteor was about to strike, and we just had to hold on. We had no idea if the virus was going to infect us, if we were going to die, if we were going to bring it home to our children, if something terrible could happen to them. We just didn't know, but we were driven by a mission and a purpose, and we continued to serve. But a lot of that weight was adding and adding and adding. Cardiology enough by itself was enough, but now the layers were just adding and adding and adding. So then one night, I just couldn't take it, and I had a complete nervous breakdown. And I was just in complete distress. My father's mother had mental health issues. She died very young, in her early 40s, and I think a lot of it, I don't know what the cause was, but I know that she was sort of similar to me, smart and driven, and she had problems with her marriage, and I don't know what happened, but she died very young, and I was very, very concerned that my fate could too match hers as well. And so I hit rock bottom again, but this time from a mental health perspective. But I was still driven. I still felt like I am supposed to be here, but I don't know what to do. So again, I took the reins on my life, and I got help. So I found a therapist. She was an African-American therapist who I was able to reach out to virtually, who focused on women like myself in this sort of corporate setting to help us to help us grieve and to help us, work through a lot of the issues that we were having. So with my first session with her, I was like, hey, I can't sleep, I haven't slept. This virus is coming, I can't latch with my child, I think they're gonna fire me, I don't know what to do, I'm not enough at home, I'm having all this struggle. And she just stops me, she says, Mary, you're human. You have to give yourself grace. The expectations that are on you are too much. And I had never even considered the concept of giving myself grace as a human being. I was always used to just keep working harder. Whatever they tell you, just keep working harder, keep doing more, just keep doing what they're telling you to do. And I had never paused to give myself grace. And so I started on this journey of self-love and just self-appreciation and value, the things that I was seeking for on the outside. I can give that to myself. So I started to re-strategize again, but in this perspective now, it's more about mental health. And I started to focus on mind. So I started reading books. This book called You're a Badass is a great one. The 21 Days of Self-Love and the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, things that were sort of going to uplift me and help me. And then I focused on body. So I started to wake up earlier and exercise. I just started, let me just do something. Something's better than nothing. So I'd wake up, I'd run for like 7 minutes, but that turned into 45 minutes a day of doing physical activity and just prioritizing my time to make sure that I was being selfish, putting that time into myself. And then soul. I started to journal and write down my feelings, write down what I was thankful for every single night, and write down what I still was inspired to do, what I still was moved to do. So I continued on. I continued to show up, to serve, to do my job each day, but now I was focusing a little bit more on helping and protecting myself. And unfortunately, as I was learning to love myself and what this journey was like, I realized that there was too much weight on me and something had to give. So as I was looking through everything, I said, well, I've been working on my brand since I was 14, and of course I'm not going to give up on motherhood, but I think the one thing that makes it very difficult for me to love myself was my marriage. So I decided to have a divorce. And so for the last about 6 months or so, I've been between hotels and Airbnbs, just trying to make sure that I was going to be financially sound, but still showing up every day and still knowing that I have a purpose to serve and that I am, continued on this mission towards this particular brand, towards cardiology. But in the face of this, I continued to get lost in my research, and I've been able to find a lot of sponsors and support. A lot of that was through Twitter, through social media. I now work with the American Heart Association, with the American College of Cardiology. I was named a cardiology influencer on Twitter. And I've gotten a lot of recognition for my work. I've been offered jobs at Ohio State and UPenn. I was recently offered to be director of this field called cardio-oncology, where I focus on people who have cancer with heart disease in North Carolina. I told my story on LinkedIn. I got 148,000 views. In just 2 months, I will graduate from cardiology fellowship and I will be a cardiologist. So I'll be able to achieve that. So I realized that I can pause for. So I realized that this adversity was preparing me for each upcoming challenge. For this journey, I held on to family principles, inspiration, and the feeling that I had a purpose, the feeling that I had to be here, that I was here for a reason. And each time I faced a challenge, my confidence increased, and I knew that each upcoming step was something that I could face. And it also allowed me to refine my brand and make my brand more specific to me. And now I'm probably one of the youngest cardiologists to lead a department and probably potentially the entire world. And I'm one of the leading experts in this particular field. So some final thoughts. If you ever fail with your brand, I put fail quotations because there's no failure, it's just a different path with your brand. Just think, what is the opportunity here? How can I refine things? How can I make things better? How can I focus more on myself? Take accountability. Have humility. Be thankful. Make sure that you tidy your space and set boundaries. Focus on your mind, body, and soul, but try not to suffer in silence. Have a group somewhere where you could release some of that so you don't have to hold it all in. Keep showing up and keep your eye on the prize, because the prize is really not what's at the end, but it's actually your courage along the journey. So getting back to my roommate, Sophia Lednoyer, getting back to her question about what is your brand, what is a brand? Your brand is specific to you. So be unapologetically you. Unwaveringly fight for your brand. If you are forced to compromise, choose your brand. Choose yourself, love yourself, and believe in yourself. Because your brand is not just your job, it's not just your career, but it's who you are. It is your purpose. So stick to it. Persist. Don't stop, and continue to believe. Thank you.